Hey guys, welcome to our second Macroeconomics 2 workshop presented by the UNSW Economic Society. In this video, we'll be covering some final exam style questions. The topics that we will be covering include monetary policy, user cost of capital, consumption, and the open economy. Question 1. Explain how misunderstanding potential real GDP can lead to the wrong monetary policy in 1995. We need to consider two scenarios. The first being when actual output is more than potential output, and the second being when actual output is less than potential output. In the first scenario, when actual output is more than potential output, the economy is in an expansion, and as a result, interest rates will be increased in order to prevent the economy from overheating. In the second scenario, when actual output is less than potential output, the economy is contracting, and interest rates will be decreased in order to stimulate consumption and investment in the economy. Therefore, a misunderstanding of the potential real GDP can lead to wrong policy decisions because the government believes that the economy is in an expansion and in response will increase interest rates. However, the economy is actually in a recession as actual output is well below true potential output. This means that an increase in interest rates will in fact worsen the recession. Question 2. Consider the following figure. Write down the equation for user cost of capital. Discuss what happens to the user cost in the following scenarios. 1. The corporate income tax rises. 2. The real interest rate rises. And 3. There is an increase in capital gains. 1. The corporate income tax rises. An increase in corporate income tax, which is represented by tau in the denominator, raises the user cost of capital. In the figure above, this change is seen as the user cost shifts from UC1 to UC2 and a reduction in capital investment. 2. The real interest rate rises. An increase in the real interest rate, which is represented by R, raises the user cost of capital. In the figure above, the user cost shifts from UC1 to UC2, which also leads to a reduction in capital investment. 3. There is an increase in capital gains. An increase in capital gains, which is represented by change in PK over PK, lowers the user cost of capital. In the figure above, the user cost shifts from UC2 to UC1, and there is more capital for investment. Question 3. Given the following utility function, where the marginal utility of consumption is c to the power of minus y, what is the Euler equation for this utility function? Show that if y is equal to 1, the Euler equation is the same as if we used the more common log utility. The basic Euler equation is shown below, where the marginal utility of C0 is equal to beta 1 plus the interest rate multiplied by the marginal utility of C1. We can rearrange this equation by moving marginal utility of C1 to the left-hand side, which is seen in the second equation. From the question, we know that the marginal utility of consumption is c to the power of minus y. We can then represent this relationship in the third line. After some rearranging, we'll end up at the final equation. Looking at the final equation, we can see that if y is equal to 1, then the Euler equation just becomes C1 over C0 is equal to beta 1 plus r, which provides the same result as using the log utility function. Question 4. Consider the information in the following table. 1. Which country has an absolute advantage in the production of each good? Which country has a comparative advantage in the production of each good? 2. Assuming each country spends half of its income on cheese and half on wine, and wine is a numeric good with no trade, what is the wage and price of cheese in each country? What is the total production of wine and cheese in each country? 3. After trade, what is the total production of each good? 1. Which country has an absolute advantage in the production of each good? Which country has a comparative advantage in the production of each good? Let's look at absolute advantage first. By observation, we can see that England has an absolute advantage in the production of cheese because they can produce 4 wheels of cheese per worker compared to 1 wheel in Portugal. Similarly, Portugal has an absolute advantage in producing wine because they can produce 50 bottles of wine per worker compared to 40 bottles in England. Now let's move on to comparative advantage. Notice that the productivity advantage for England is much larger in producing cheese than in producing wine. A worker in England can produce 40 times as many wheels of cheese as a worker in Portugal, but only 12.5 times as many bottles of wine. In this case, we can say that England has a comparative advantage in producing cheese, since it is more productive in the production of cheese compared to Portugal. Similarly, Portugal is more productive in the production of wine, so it has a comparative advantage in wine. 2. Assuming each country spends half of its income on cheese and half on wine, and wine is a numeric good with no trade, what is the wage and price of cheese in each country? What is the total production of wine and cheese in each country? Since we are quoting our prices in terms of wine, it must be the case that the wage is equal to the bottles of wine that a worker can produce, which is equal to the MPL. This means that in England, the wage of wine is 40, and the wage of wine is 50 in Portugal. The price of cheese in terms of wine is then 40 divided by 4, which is equal to 10 in England, and 50 divided by 1, which is equal to 50 in Portugal. To figure out how many of each good they consume in each country, we perform the following calculations. To calculate the consumption of wine in England, we multiply the wage of wine, which is 40, by 0.5, because they're consuming half of their income in wine. To calculate the consumption of cheese, we multiply the number of cheese wheels that each worker can produce by 0.5. Therefore, the same calculations can then be done to find the consumption of wine and cheese for Portugal. To calculate aggregate production, we multiply the number of goods consumed in each country with the labour force in each country. In the previous slide, England consumed 20 bottles of wine and 2 wheels of cheese. To find our total production of wine in England, we multiply 20 by 25 because they consumed 20 bottles of wine and there are 25 workers in England. With the same intuition, we multiply 2 by 25 to find the total production of cheese in England. The same calculations can then be done to find the total production of wine and cheese for Portugal. 3. After trade, what is the total production of each good? From part 1, we know that England has a comparative advantage in producing cheese, and Portugal is more productive in the production of wine. This means that all labour is allocated to the production of cheese in England, and labour in the wine sector is 0. Similarly, all labour will be allocated in the production of wine in Portugal, and labour in the cheese sector will be equal to 0. The total production of wine is then 200 times 50, since Portugal is producing all the wine, and the total production of cheese is 25 times 4, since England is producing all the cheese. So, this brings us to the end of our video. Thank you so much for watching and good luck for your exams.